welcome to Chicago Reacts. My name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be looking at a video by a channel called Razbuten. This video is what Elden Ring is like for someone who doesn't play games. And you know what? Me. So I'm curious to see what this means from this person. Also, it seems like this is their whole channel, is like, as a non-gamer, this is how the game works. And so I'm just like, so you are, in fact, somewhat of a gamer, but I think I'll at least get a slightly better feel for what this game would be like than when I watch like videos based on the lore or something where you or boss battles from like great players. You know, I feel like it'll be a little bit more realistic as to the experience I could expect. So I'm looking forward to this. I think it'll be fun. I've been doing a lot of Elden Ring stuff recently, and I've been kind of fascinated. So let's go.
More boomerly known as the lady. Over the past few years, I've had my wife, more boomerly known as the lady I live with, try out a handful of video games in order for me to get a better idea of what they're like for people who don't spend much time playing.
Okay, so his wife plays them. Okay, interesting. All right.
Them. These informal experiments not only have given me a better understanding of some of the obstacles that exist for those with little to no experience with games, but also have been intriguing explorations of what goes into learning the language of gaming. Okay. As a result of these experiments, my wife went from being entirely unfamiliar with typical game conventions and mechanics to having a decent grasp over how games work and what they expect from players. She even took an interest in a couple of titles, playing them far.
I mean, yeah, you do just have to do it yourself. Like, that is how you get good at games, is that you like find some games that you're interested, like that you do like, you figure out what works and what doesn't work, and then you get better at all games. But like, okay, it's true. That's how it works, I suppose.
Far beyond what I asked her to do for these videos. And she was well along in her journey of going from a non-gamer to a gamer. And now it's been a year and a half since she last picked up a controller.
Okay.
As it turns out, time never stops moving forward. A fact that has become especially apparent since adding a baby we live with to our household.
Aww.
Life gets away from you fast. But now we've had a few good nights of sleep and are ready for another informal experiment.
That was?
While I assume she has retained some of the skills she built up through previous experiences, this gap almost certainly will lead to her being rustier than before. So clearly, the best way to ease her back into things is by having her play Elden Ring.
I'm ready.
All right.
For battle. Can you get me someone to fight? I know, I'm not ready for battle.
Nope.
I'm not ready for battle.
In just its first year,
Fair.
Elden Ring has become the best-selling game FromSoft has ever made. It's exposed a slew of first-time players to the Souls-like genre, and is widely considered to be the best entry point for people new to FromSoft games.
Damn, really? Okay.
Of course, my question is, how approachable is it for someone who barely plays games at all?
Okay.
For this experiment, I didn't give her a specific goal to accomplish, as I wanted to see how she would naturally interact with the game, but I did set a secret end condition of having her beat at least one boss outside of the tutorial. As always, I sat back as a mostly quiet observer, only giving occasional reminders of things she had already learned and advice for what to do when she got stuck on something for a substantial amount of time.
That can be
so
quite
this is how it went.
Okay. Go Raz's wife. How my wife got good.
As some of you may remember, one of the very first games I had my wife play for this series was Elden Ring's predecessor, Dark Souls, and it went pretty much exactly how you'd expect it to go.
Smack.
Can I be done yet?
Due to her lack of gaming experience, mixed with Dark Souls' opaque and sometimes confusing design, she had a ton of trouble just figuring out how to do things, which led to her dying a lot.
That would make, and again, this is why you don't want to start with the Dark Souls game, I think, if you've never played anything before, because it's like it seems like it would be an exercise in frustration, which is what I feel like I've mentioned a few times when it comes to like some of the Elder Scrolls boss battles and stuff that I've watched. It's just like, this feels like it would be just so frustrating, like trying to figure it out. And again, maybe if I played other games more, it would be a little bit easier. But like, I mean, I've been playing Resident Evil 5 with friends, and it's like, well, I say playing. We've been playing for over a year at this point, because like, it's at the most we've played 3 weeks in a row, you know, every Friday for like 3 weeks we played, but usually there's several months in between us actually playing. So I never actually improve. it's still fun because there's somebody with me, but like, and he can pick up all of my slack, which he does. He picks up all of my slack. Thank you for that.
Even when she did figure out the very basics, she still couldn't get past the asylum demon. As there was no way to level up in the undead asylum, her only way to move forward was by using the tools she had in order to defeat him.
Oof.
With enough practice, I'm confident that she could have done it, but she found losing over and over again to be extremely demoralizing. And after an hour straight of dying to the same boss, she had no interest in playing anymore. By presenting such a tough skill check for players in his tutorial, it sets the tone for what the rest of the game will be like at the cost of turning some players away. Elden Ring takes a much different approach with its tutorial by having it be completely optional. Players don't have to prove they understand the basics to access the core of the game, and instead can just head to the overworld without any real challenge. In fact, when Elden Ring first came out, many didn't even realize there was a tutorial, as it involves jumping into a dark pit that is pushed off to the side, whereas the path to the overworld is brightly lit and in the center of the screen when the player character spawns.
Yeah, I really
This eventually led FromSoft to include a message that tells players about the tutorial so that they don't run.
Jump down that hole ahead. You'll find a cave of knowledge, said the serpent to Eve. What the hell? Ha! Oh my god, that's so funny. Oh, I would just assume that that was a troll. Like the game trolling me and like, I would 100% assume that wasn't a real thing. And it was just trying to get me to do it to kill me right off. And so then it would like Willy Wonka me into not trusting anything. I don't know. Wow.
Given all of this history, I was curious to see if my wife would go into the Cave of Knowledge without the prompt, so I turned off all tutorial notifications before I had her start, and she did very nearly miss it, but not for the reasons you might think. When she first began walking around the Chapel of Anticipation, she noticed various bloodstains and messages. Without the knowledge that other players had left them behind, she assumed they were made by the developers, almost as if they were a core part of understanding the game. So instead of viewing them as the random ramblings that they often are, she thought they were all important. In fairness, in Dark Souls,
I also would have thought that. I didn't realize that players could do that. That feels awful. Players can like put their own little messages in the game. That's kind of fun, but also I would definitely, oh god, no, because I am such a like, I want to read everything. Like, every piece of notebook paper I pick up in a game, I want to read it. Like, I'm so invested in like finding out the story of these games, of any game. So like, oh no, that would get me. That would get me right away.
All the messages in the tutorial are from the developers, and they largely just lay out the basic controls. So it is possible that her assumption of how they worked in Elden Ring came from that, although she barely had any recollection of her time with Dark Souls as it was so long ago. So if that was the connection she made, it was a subconscious one. Anyway, in true FromSoft fashion, one of the first messages she read pointed to the side of a cliff and said to jump off. Incidentally, at the same time, she clicked a bloodstain that showed a figure doing just that. So wondering if it was some sort of secret, she followed suit.
Okay.
Try jumping. What?
Okay. Whee!
What? Are you kidding me? What am I supposed to do?
I mean, I would have done that too.
Down to the stranded graveyard and was told by another spirit-looking thing to take the plunge, she was very skeptical and refused to jump down.
Are they trying to kill me again?
For a second, I thought she was going to continue along the main path.
I might have just done it anyway, though. Like, I am that person who, like, if there is a potential to, like, make the same silly mistake every single time, it's like, but maybe this time it'll be different. So, like, there's, when I was a kid, I played the Nancy Drew games, and I've played them recently, too. It's not just when I was a kid. But when I was a kid and I played them, there's one of the games in Final Scene. I couldn't remember which one it was. Final Scene. There's, like, this gear that you have to get. So you're on this, like, balcony of a theater, and there's a gear that's, like, you can tell you need it. You need this gear. And if you don't have the materials you need and you reach forward, Nancy says, I don't know if I can reach that. And then if you reach forward again, you fall off the balcony and plummet to your death. So like then you get the materials you need. But it's like, it's so much fun to kill Nancy in those games. Like, at least especially in the early ones, there's some great ways to kill Nancy in the Nancy Drew games. Like you can drown her, you can blow her up, you can throw her off really high objects. Like there's so many different ways to kill this girl. And it is fun every single time. And even if I know it's happening, I will do it every single time. Like I don't know if there's if there's like an achievement anymore, like at all, because at the beginning there was no Steam or anything, so achievements weren't really a thing. But like, I wonder if they've added an achievement for like gaining every single second chance. So it's like, because I used to do that too. Like there was another game where it's like you could die in this bog in like 7 different ways, and like it would tell you each of the 7 different ways you could die, and like I would literally just do the same thing over and over again until I got all 7 deaths. Like, just to see what they were gonna say. So my point is, if there is something high in a video game, I do try to jump off it almost every single time, regardless of whether it's killed me before. So if I saw this pit, I might, in fact, jump off. That was a long way around saying that, so sorry about that tangent.
After running around a bit, she read another message that said the cave of knowledge lies below. This was the only message she had come across that was direct and didn't feel like a bunch of gibberish strung together, so something about it felt more official to her, and she decided to finally go for it. While this ended up being the only time the messages influenced how she approached an area, it was interesting to see someone engage with them as if they really mattered, and weren't just a sometimes helpful but often goofy online feature. The Cave of Knowledge itself proved to be an okay tutorial, although it did have a few issues. All the prompts for the game's controls and mechanics are shown in one of 2 ways, either as a small pop-up on the left side of the screen, or a big text box that momentarily pauses the game. For the most part, this was fine, but as her focus was on the center of the screen, there were a few instances where she just didn't notice the instructions on the side, missing pretty important information like how to lock on to enemies. In fact, the only reason she ended up figuring that out was because she accidentally pressed it while panicking. As for the more obvious text prompts, she kept getting annoyed by being stopped every few seconds to have something explained to her, especially when most of them could have just been communicated with a single button prompt. I'm unsure why they use these 2 different approaches to teach players the controls, but I think in regards to helping less experienced players learn the game, it would have been better off finding a middle ground between the 2, where the prompts show up in the center of the screen but don't halt the game completely. It'd make things obvious without being nearly as annoying. On the topic of teaching players the controls, one issue I have noticed throughout many of these informal experiments is that a lot of games on PC don't allow players to customize the UI of button prompts. Oftentimes, the only option is the Xbox gamepad layout, which has also been adopted by Steam. As I only own PlayStation controllers, this has led to some confusion for my wife when playing games on PC that don't have that kind of customization, which was the case for Elden Ring. I actually ended up having to make a cheat sheet to help her out. Now, I understand that the vast majority of people who use a gamepad on PC will opt for an Xbox controller as it is the most compatible with Windows, but there are a substantial number of people who use other controllers, and it seems like a missed opportunity to not support them. Having more customization for button UI only serves to make games more accessible. I'm not sure if this is a game or engine issue, and it could be far more complicated to incorporate than it seems on the surface. But even if it is, given the resources FromSoft has, it feels weird they didn't include it. While this is not the biggest deal in the world, it is a quality of life improvement that I would love to see in every game, as it would help a lot of players and save me from needing to buy an Xbox controller for future experiments. Anyway, on the whole, my wife had a much better time navigating the Cave of Knowledge than she did with the Undead Asylum, and I think a big part of that was due to it ending with a much more manageable boss fight. The Soldier of Godric is really just an average enemy, but because he has a boss-sized health bar and intense music, it makes the fight feel more important and impressive than it actually is. The challenge was well suited for her, and only took her a few tries to overcome, so she left with the satisfaction of beating what she found to be a tough boss without ever getting demoralized. All in all, Elden Ring's tutorial largely seems designed with new and inexperienced players in mind, which is a notable departure from most other tutorial areas in FromSoft games that rarely pull any punches. Because of her success, she entered the Lands Between with a sense of confidence, a feeling that unfortunately did not last when she was introduced to the wider offerings of the game.
Fair enough, I guess. Exploring the Lands Between.
As she stepped out into the Lands Between, she was immediately overwhelmed with how massive it was, and at first questioned where to go. After seeing the tree sentinel patrolling below, she assumed that must be the way and promptly got murdered.
How do you beat that? How do you do it? How do you do it?
Not wanting to have to deal with it, she decided to head west instead, where she then ran into a demi-human giant and...
Oh.
I still feel bad for those guys.
shoot.
This time after respawning, she surveyed the land a bit more, trying to determine the right path, which is when she noticed the Erd tree in the distance.
She didn't notice
figured
that before?
That must be where she needed to go. With her destination
Big.
picked, she pretty much just ran in a straight line towards it, bringing her close to the gatefront ruins. And I think this is a great example of how well thought out Elden Ring's world design is. While there isn't really a wrong way to go, as exploration is a core part of the gameplay loop, there is a main path for players to follow in order to progress.
Okay.
Although even that technically isn't mandatory, but it is what most people will do. This path starts at the gatefront ruins, leads up to Stormhill, and then to the first major boss of the game, Margit. Of the various ways Elden Ring tries to direct players towards the gatefront ruins, this was one I did not pick up on during my own playthrough, but it makes a lot of sense. The Erd tree is massive, and its golden hue stands out amongst the rest of the environment.
Yes.
Many players will no doubt be curious to see what is at the base of it, and while this isn't a goal they will actually be able to accomplish at this point, it is still something that can be used to influence their decision making. So even if someone ignores the main roads and the guidance of grace that literally points players where to go, like my wife did, all it takes is being intrigued by
I
the
wouldn't
Erd
notice
tree
that
to be
either.
led.
It definitely, that would, I don't think that would like clock to me as like they're pointing it in that direction. But I think I probably would go towards the giant glowing tree. I think that's likely what I would do. Unless I just assumed that it was part of just the atmosphere and general vibe of the place and you couldn't actually get there, but
to the main path. Once getting to the Stormgate site of Grace and unlocking Torrent as well as the ability to level up, she kept pressing forward, opting to ride past enemies instead of actually engaging with them.
Good idea.
As
That's
she
what I
made
would
her
do.
way into Stormhill, she lost track of the Erd tree as the fog in the area decreased visibility a bit, and it was mostly blocked by the ruins of a bridge. For the few moments it was in sight, she was preoccupied by a pack of wolves that ambushed her, so instead of continuing towards it, she ended up following the road instead. While I don't know the full intentions of the developers, obscuring it in these ways seems like a very intentional choice so that players head towards Margit instead of the Erd tree itself, which will just take them to a cliff's edge. Frankly, watching her play made me appreciate the world design of Elden Ring even more than I already did.
Although I will say, if you just kind of blow past all the enemies and you don't learn how to do it, then fighting Margit will be difficult. It'll be a little bit more harder. If possible, maybe not even that. It might not be possible. Words are hard and I hate them. Get rid of words.
Honestly didn't think was possible. There are so many subtle touches that help guide players while still managing to feel natural to the world. And it was really cool to see these design choices lead my wife in a certain direction. With her focus shifted to moving along the main road, she ran into a battalion guarding a gate and decided to deal with them in the same way she had with every other enemy so far, running past them. Her first few attempts of charging straight in were met with failure, but as she examined the area, she noticed that there weren't as many guards along the side of the road, so she just went around and slipped past them. The ability to avoid conflict definitely made parts of the experience less frustrating for her, as at least while riding around the open world, there was nothing she ever really felt stuck on, and she enjoyed weaving around enemies and finding clever ways past them.
You can feel
With
like
that
you're
said, the flaw of her approach
outsmarting
is
them.
that the game doesn't reward players with experience or items for not fighting. So when she got to Margit, she was woefully underprepared both in terms of player skill and character upgrades.
Yup.
Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah, you're
oh,
boned,
no.
girl. He just knocks you off a cliff.
So annoying.
These sorts of skill checks are common barriers in FromSoft titles, with the majority of their games, as there are only a few paths players can take. If they want to progress and see new areas, they will have to overcome difficult bosses pretty regularly, either by taking the time to learn their attack patterns and weaknesses, or grinding the same areas over and over again to level up enough and make them less challenging.
See, I've done that in like when I play DS games or something. Like not the first time I played The World Ends With You, but the second time I played The World Ends With You, I remember just grinding and grinding and grinding. It's like, I'm going to just beat every single piece of noise in the area I can find, and then I'll go to the next area and beat every single piece of noise in that area, and then I'll go back to the first area and beat the ones that have respawned. Like, I spent so much time grinding and like leveling up all my pins so they were all like at max level. It makes it a lot easier. It is kind of a slog to do though. So
As I mentioned before, in Dark Souls, when my wife ran into a barrier like this, the frustration of losing so many times led her to want to stop playing. But her experience with Elden Ring in this regard ended up being a fair bit different. After dying a few times and realizing she stood no chance, she just went off to look for other things to engage with. Due to its open world structure, players have an incredible amount of options of stuff they can do. This makes it so when they hit a spot they're not ready for, instead of repeatedly bashing their head against a wall, they can simply leave and come back
Actually,
later.
no.
While there are still a few choke points in Elden Ring players will need to eventually overcome in order to progress, due to the sheer amount of content that can be accessed from the moment players set foot in Limgrave, it is unlikely they will be forced to conquer a challenge before they are ready to do so.
Okay,
At least that's how it's supposed to
something.
work in theory. When my wife actually went off to find other things to do, it proved to be more difficult than expected. She wanted to find enemies to fight so she could get enough runes to level up, but she struggled with knowing where to look. She did come across a few encampments, but they all had a lot of enemies roaming around them. While she was able to pick off a few that hung around the outskirts, anytime she moved too far in and had to take on more than one enemy at a time, it didn't go well.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Okay. Rude.
So she spent a lot of time riding around in search of things that felt more manageable, but struggled to find anything of substance. Occasionally she'd encounter an enemy off on their own that she could take out, but this didn't yield significant enough results.
Yeah, that's
As she
not-
didn't know how to take on
it's too
multiple
bad.
enemies at the same time, especially in wide open areas where they could easily surround her, her best bet was finding a cave. But despite passing a few, she didn't notice them. And
Oh.
after aimlessly riding around for a while,
when you
entirely
should have helped her.
unprompted, she said,
I like Breath of the Wild better.
when I asked her why, along with saying it was just generally less stressful, she also remarked on how it was so much easier to find things. And that makes a lot of sense. The shrines and Sheikah towers stand out due to their bright orange lighting and sleek design that is unnatural to the Kingdom of Hyrule. Also, they can be spotted from far away and will draw the attention of most players. Now,
Oh, there. I saw it eventually. I was like, he's talking about how this thing is obvious. I'm like, where is it? I saw it eventually. Oh god, no, I'm bad at noticing stuff like that in the games. Like it needs to literally be like in front of me shining for me to see it.
Elden Ring does a good job of signaling where points of interest are through the use of light sources, but for her, these kinds of lights didn't register as a sign that there was something to explore. She just saw them as set dressing, so she never paid all that much mind to them. The style and visual language of a game has a huge impact on how individuals interpret things, and obviously for inexperienced players, the less complex that visual language is, the easier it will be to understand what they can and can't engage with. As a lot of Elden Ring's visual language is more subtle than Breath of the Wild, certain things just stood out less to her. Eventually, I gave her some pointers on what she should be looking for, and she found a cave pretty quickly, which is when the real challenge began, as she finally had to figure out how to actually fight.
Uh-oh. Tricky. Rolling, rolling, rolling. That is
Of all
what you
the
do.
bosses she could have faced, I was really glad she came across the Beastman of Fair Missoula, as he leaves a lot of openings and doesn't have that much health. So I figured if there was any boss in the game she could beat, it'd likely be him. And
Okay. She's like tearing him to pieces, huh? Except for he got her.
break the desk or control.
Dude, I don't like this.
In general, she lacked patience and coordination. Pretty much every time she got into a fight, she'd do a lot of panic pressing, leading to either attacking or rolling way more than she needed to. So for the most
I
part,
mean,
she was either
I have literally never seen anyone play this game where they didn't like constantly roll. Like just it seems like it's rolling, 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 slash, rolling, 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 stab, rolling, 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 cut. You know, like it's the same over and over again. So I was like,
all in on attacking or all in on rolling away, rarely putting the two together to effectively suss
Oh, I
out
guess
attacks
that's
and
what he was
counter
just
when
saying,
an opening
like, that's what
presented
you're supposed
itself.
to do.
She also had a fair bit
A
of
lot of
trouble with
rolling in
doing
this
various
game.
actions at the same time as moving. So whenever she attacked, called Torrent, or chugged a flask, she would let go of the joystick first, leaving herself extremely vulnerable. Maybe most consequentially, she found every battle to be anxiety-inducing, leading to her squeezing the controller super tightly and accidentally pressing wrong buttons, resulting in inopportune item use and crouching at the worst times possible. As she battled against the beast
I would do
more
stuff
and
like
more,
that.
though, she started to do better. She dodged more effectively, got hits in without trading damage, and even recognized certain attacks.
that's like I'm pretty sure that's how I play. But like again, usually if I'm playing a game, the guns are involved, so it's like trying to find the reticle, trying to aim at the thing. I just can't do it. Like I'm also very terrible at this kind of thing, so it's like I feel for her. I do.
She had a handful of attempts where she got him down to around half health, which was a huge improvement over her earlier tries. With that said, despite the improvement being encouraging, the repeated failure still proved to be immensely frustrating. She kept trying for a while as something about the fight seemed more doable to her than the one with Margit had, but she eventually hit a point where it was clear that it would take a lot of grinding in order for her to beat him, and she didn't really have the tolerance to go through that. So it seemed like her playthrough would end there. However, after she stopped playing that day, I realized that there was a pretty major mechanic that she hadn't engaged with in the slightest that could help give her an edge, that being the Spirit Ashes. Unlike other iterations of summons in FromSoft titles, the Spirit Ashes feel more like a core part of the game. While summoning in the Souls series requires the use of a limited resource, the Ashes only require FP or HP, making it a far more reliable tool. Having beaten the game almost entirely without using the Ashes, I hate you Millennia, I'd say that the bosses largely seem to be balanced around them, especially the fights with multiple enemies. And given that one of the most common rewards for exploring is an item that upgrades the spirits, it feels like the game was designed with the assumption that they would be a key part of the player's arsenal. Naturally, there will always be a contingent of Souls fans who refuse to use certain mechanics because they prefer to play that way, but not every player is looking for an extra challenge. For folks struggling with the constant pressure many of the bosses put on them, the Spirit Ashes are a great way to redirect attention and deal more damage, so it seemed like the perfect thing for my wife to use. With that said, for it being such a helpful item, especially for less experienced players, it is surprisingly easy to miss. It involves going to the Church of Ella at nighttime after getting access to Torrent, or buying it from the Twin Maiden Husks in the Round Table Hold after enough time passes. I imagine there are a few reasons they opted to make the item one the player has to find instead of one automatically given, but after watching my wife's playthrough, I think it would be a bit better if it was something that couldn't be missed. Anyway, I decided to have my wife give the fight another shot, but this time with a spirit summon. So I pointed her in the right direction so she could get the Spirit Calling Bell and Lone Wolf Ashes. With a new tool at her disposal, she headed back to the cave for another face-off. And it was a bloodbath. The Beastman kept getting stun-locked by the wolves, and my wife jumped in every so often to deal a bit of damage.
Good job,
until...
wolves.
They did it for me!
Yay! Isn't it nice? I love having help. Thanks, little guys.
I didn't do anything! My wolves did it all!
After beating him, she felt a little underwhelmed. She had spent so much time trying to take him out on her own, but felt that in the final fight, the wolves did most of the work. And yeah, they did. I went to test it on my own afterwards, and the wolves were able to take out like 75% of his health with me just sitting there. She didn't have a problem with the idea of getting help from the spirits, but in this instance, they were far too effective. While I do still stand by the idea that most of the bosses are balanced around the use of spirits, clearly the Beastman wasn't. And unfortunately, the way it played out robbed her of some satisfaction. So I decided to try one more thing. Many of her struggles with the game did come from a lack of experience, but there was one aspect that was causing her a significant amount of trouble that arguably got in the way of her improving, that being her choice of starting class. She went with the Bandit, which is actually the same one she originally chose in Dark Souls, although it has a different name there. At the time, I didn't really think much of it, but after watching her play and then doing some research after, it became apparent that it is one of the worst classes, especially for someone learning how to play for the first time. It has one of the lowest starting levels and gear that is not well suited for new players, as the armor doesn't negate much damage, the shield is primarily used for parrying, which she did not have the timing down for, and the dagger is really short, so she always had to get super close to enemies in order to hit them, making it difficult to have proper spacing. The character selection screen doesn't show any stats by default, and mainly presents characters by their designs, so she chose entirely based on which class she thought looked the coolest, instead of by comparing their attributes. With that said, even if she had diligently looked at the stats, aside from seeing that some classes had bigger numbers, I don't think that the information would have been all that valuable in terms of making an informed choice about.
See, that I would have one leg up on her for, just because I do have some experience with like choosing stats and stuff for characters and like knowing what those stats mean, at least with some of them. So it's like looking at, the levels are good, but also like looking at vigor, endurance, strength, dex, intelligence, like those kind of things I could kind of look at and be like, oh, okay, I can equate those to certain things with the systems I know, and I think that would help me choose a character level to start with. I know, because I don't know, I would like to go into a game like this with like as much armor as I physically could, I think.
Which would be the best for her, as there's a lot of information without much context.
But I also love Dex. Oh my god, I'm such a Dex fiend. I love being a flippy bitch. Like, Let me just flip away. Range, but ranged though is important. I prefer ranged attacks usually. So it's like if I can't find something that is like a bow and arrow, or a gun, which I'm bad at anyway, but like then give me a big old sword and armor, and I'll sacrifice some dex for a big old sword. So let me be a tank.
And I understand that part of the FromSoft experience is unknowingly making decisions that negatively impact you, but I'd say the game could benefit from being clearer about which classes are more difficult to start with than others. In fairness, it does have what is probably the best choice for new players be the first option, and what is certainly the worst be the last one, but this won't be super obvious for those less familiar with Souls games. While pretty much every new player
if
will
you look at that guy, do you really want to start there? I mean, his level's 1, he's at 10s on everything, so like that's not terrible, I guess.
Understand that they shouldn't pick
not
the
great.
wretch, that doesn't help them choose between the other
There was like options for like 14 and 15 and other ones. So it's like,
classes. Anyway, in the hopes that it would make a difference, I created a new character for her, this time choosing the Vagabond, and got her back to the fight. Lo and behold, it felt like a way more reasonable challenge for her. Her attacks did significantly more damage that could cause knockback, and she was able to keep more space between her and the Beastman, all of which helped her better apply the skill she had gained during all of her failed attempts. With more health and defense, the build gave a bit more room for error, so when she did make a mistake, she wasn't punished as severely for it. And then, after a handful of tries...
Your character matters. Yay! See how happy she sounded? She got him on her own.
Oh my god, dude, that was a close call.
Did that one feel better?
Oh yeah, that felt better.
That was a good middle ground. Through trial and error, we were able to find an approach that worked for her while not oversimplifying things too much. And it was really fun to see that happen, which made me want to see her overcome a different challenge. One that has been sitting unfinished for over 3 years now.
Wow.
One that requires going back to the start of all of this to complete.
The asylum guy?
Having seen the benefits of using a weapon larger than a toothpick, she opted to pick the warrior instead of the thief. As I mentioned earlier, as it has been a few years since we ran the very first informal experiment, she had forgotten almost everything about the tutorial. So she fought the asylum demon for far too long with a broken sword, got rolled by the boulder, and was sniped by an undead archer. But when she actually began her attempts on the asylum demon, she looked more confident and competent than she ever had before. With a decent bit of Elden Ring under her belt, she not only had gotten better at combat, but had also gotten used to the much faster gameplay. So she found the asylum demon easier to read than any of the bosses she had faced in Elden Ring. While she wasn't always perfect at keeping up with his attacks, she was able to better capitalize on openings and avoid its big, slow swings. On her first attempt, she was able to do more damage than she had ever done to him on her original playthrough. On her second, she choked. But on her third...
Oh my god, that would like... That's amazing. That would feel so good.
There are a lot
of
factors that went into her finally
not now,
being
but if I
able
was
to
her.
beat the asylum demon, like using a half-decent starting class and just more general experience with playing games. But I think a big part of it came from her learning a lot of the basic skills of combat in Elden Ring, a game that, while far from perfect, much more clearly teaches players how to play, and then applying the lessons she learned from it to its predecessor. In short, Elden Ring helped her get good, and that's pretty cool to see.
That's really cool to see. The end.
So, is Elden Ring a good starting point for people who don't really play games?
No.
I mean, no, of course not. Although
No.
it was far more approachable for her than I expected it to be. Between its fairly detailed tutorial, thoughtful world layout, and abundance of options for how to approach a fight, it gives inexperienced players a lot of tools to help them succeed. It still contains the difficulty and obscurity that has long defined the series, making it so people who don't really play games all that often will struggle to get a grasp on things without help from an outside source, but it also has a few shifts from how FromSoft typically operates that seem to be there as a way to appeal to a wider audience. Of course, FromSoft doesn't and shouldn't design their games with players like my wife in mind, as she is nowhere near their target demographic. However, I do think it's interesting to see the ways they've tried to pull in players a bit outside of their typical circle, expanding their approachability while not losing their distinct identity. Personally, I think they could have gone a bit further with certain aspects to give a better experience for players new to the genre, but I also understand that they are trying to maintain a delicate balance and don't want to push things too far. All in all, I had a lot of fun watching my wife shake off the rust from her gaming hiatus and go on to take her skills to a new level.
Which is
Even
nice.
though she did not enjoy playing Elden Ring, it did push
She's
her
like,
to
"This
understand
sucks, but I
games
won,
a bit
though."
better. as well as overcome a challenge that she hadn't been able to before.
How long did it take me last time to do that?
You didn't do it last time.
Okay.
You never did.
Rude.
But you've gotten better. For those of you interested in
That is kind of funny. It's like, how long did that take you? 3 years? Like, I don't know. It never happened.
more of my wife's journey with Elden Ring, I actually put together a highlight video of part of her playthrough that you can watch right now over on Nebula. By now, I assume you already know the deal about it, but in case you don't, Nebula is a streaming service made and owned by creators, me being one of them. On Nebula, you can watch videos from many of the best creators on YouTube ad-free, as well as a ton of exclusive content that is made possible by Nebula's support. Among other things, it gives us a place to post stuff that is more experimental and doesn't always work as well on YouTube. Every time my wife and I do one of these informal experiments, we end up recording for hours, and there always wind up being far more interesting moments than could ever fit into a single video essay. So if you'd like to hear my wife curse some more at a video game, that's the place to do it.
Ah! What's happening? Why? Crushed it.
And the best part of it all is that Nebula has partnered with this video's sponsor, CuriosityStream, in order to get you the best deal on the internet. If you sign up for a year-long subscription of CuriosityStream before January 2nd, you not only get access to the thousands of incredible documentaries on their site, but you also get a free membership to Nebula for just under $12 for the year. And if you're watching this after the holiday special ends, the price is only around $15
a whole year ago.
So no matter what, it's still a great value. After signing up by using my code or the link below, you get an email from Nebula to set up your account, and then you can watch all the awesome content that only exists there to your heart's content. And that's barely even touching on all the incredible stuff you'll be able to watch on CuriosityStream itself. Its library is ever expanding, and there are amazing documentaries on pretty much every topic you could imagine. I've mentioned before that I love nature documentaries, as it is the closest I get to going outside, and it is chock full of them. So whether you want to hear about whales or bison or pretty much any other animal, they've got you covered. All in all, it's a great deal. For less than $12 a year, you can get all the great stuff on CuriosityStream, as well as a ton of extra content from awesome creators over on Nebula. And at just $1 a month, you'll not only be helping me out, but also be getting more high quality content than you'll know what to do with. So check it out. Anyway, thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this video. For all of you still watching, thank you. I'd like to give a big shout out to my patrons who make—
All right, so grand. I'm gonna give it a little like. It's an older video, but that's fine. It is always fun. Again, I'm enjoying this like weird little rabbit hole I found myself in with Elden Ring. I've really been enjoying myself with it. So I hope you all have been too. If there's something else specifically that I should be looking at, don't forget to tell me in the comments below. And if you want to see more stuff like this, you know, go ahead and like the video. It helps us know. If you want to help the channel out financially, there's a couple ways you can do that. One is to become a channel member. You can get access to early videos and some extra videos. Like I think I've got a couple of like Dragon Ball Z movie things, like the Dragon Ball Z abridged movies that are so far only accessible over on the membership page. You could also become a patron if you're looking for more anime type stuff. We have a lot of anime, full animes over there on Patreon, as well as a couple of movies and things like that at their uncut glory. So that is how you can support the channel if you so choose. But again, if just leaving a like also helps a lot. So thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.